Hello, and welcome to Williams Mullen's Trending Now, an IP podcast, a legal podcast focused on providing innovative companies and investors with important and timely information concerning intangible assets such as patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. I'm your host, Janet Cho, and I'll be joined today by my colleague, Elizabeth Davenport, who is a paralegal in our intellectual property practice group here at Williams Mullen. And today we will be discussing Paralegal Insights, a collaborative trademark practice. And specifically, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, product specimens and mastering product specimens. So before we get into that, I wanted to just welcome Elizabeth Davenport. Elizabeth, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Janet. Thanks.
Great. So before we get into it, I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by specimens and the purpose of specimens and generally what they're about. And then I will pass it to Elizabeth to talk about really why we're here, the specifics of what you need to know about submission of product specimens. So as a general matter, I think a lot of people out there who are our listeners have probably heard the word specimen before. We may have even asked you for a specimen in the past. And basically what a specimen is a term that's used to reference evidence of use of a trademark. So you may have previously submitted a specimen at the time you filed an application. Certainly, if you want to progress an application or mature it to registration, you likely would have submitted a specimen. And when you want to renew your trademark registration during its life, you will likely have submitted a specimen. So when we say we need a specimen from you, we're looking for your help in proving that your mark is in use. I think the trickiest thing, or one of the most vexing things, shall I say, about the specimen is that what we mean by use of your mark and how we understand that as a term, use in the general public, is likely, or perhaps not always, the same understanding that an examining attorney or the United States Patent and Trademark Office may have as to use. To put it more bluntly, the USPTO has very, very specific expectations when they ask to see use of a mark. It can be tough to, depending on what your mark is and what you're promoting, to meet that expectation. So our goal today is to provide you with some helpful and practical information so that whenever you are called upon to provide evidence of use, you'll know what to do and you'll have some strategies ready and teed up to go. So what exactly do we mean by use? What we mean by use is that your mark is, one, being used in your marketplace, however you define that, whether that's online sales, sales in a store, individual sales pitches, however you promote your product is what we mean by use. Whatever realm or method you use to promote your product is what we mean by use. And it has to be actual use, meaning it cannot be just use internally. Very often we get questions about, well, we're using it on the company intranet, and that in and of itself is acceptable, but without more, you likely don't have the use that the USPTO is looking for. Because a trademark is essentially a commercial tool, what you use to do business, the USPTO's expectation is that you're actually using your mark to communicate with your consumers. So we need actual bona fide use. And to be helpful, one of the questions that we receive is, should I have actually sold a product under the mark? Will that comprise use? And while the USPTO's rules don't specifically call for that, I think it's always helpful and bolsters your position around use if you can actually say that you have sold a product, or you're actually marketing the product, or the product is actually available. If you are promoting a product and it's technically not available for purchase yet, then you don't have use. If you have a website that for which you're selling a product, but the website doesn't really allow you to engage in any way, say put the product in your cart or anything like that, then again, you likely don't have use. So the flip side of that is, what does use not mean? Again, if it's internal use, if your product is not actually available, and also if you are selling your product, but you're actually not using the mark with it, that's not going to be use that the USPTO will accept. Very often, you will see a product available for purchase, but the mark doesn't appear in any way either on the product or in the manner in which you would otherwise purchase the product. So that's not use that the USPTO is looking for. So those are just some governing principles to think about. And certainly a lot of this is attorney's discretion and expectation and likely some conventions of the USPTO's practice. But I think those are just some basics to think about as you navigate the waters of proving use of a product. So with that, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth will be discussing in detail what would be considered acceptable as a product or goods specimen. Elizabeth?
Okay, so today we're focusing on acceptable goods specimens. The best approach is to choose a specimen of use that clearly displays the mark on the goods, and when you're doing trademark filings, to describe the specimens fully and accurately. In a use-based application, the applicant must verify the mark in use in connection with the goods in commerce as of the date of first use stated in the application. An acceptable use in commerce is use of the mark on the products in the usual course of trade, and not use of the mark just as placeholder. The mark should be used prominently on the goods. Acceptable use of the mark on goods must display the mark on packaging, labels, hang tags, containers, or point of sale displays. Mock-ups, artist renderings, or printer's proofs are not acceptable specimens. If the product is such that it is not possible to submit a standard specimen of use and place the mark on the actual product, such as bulk items, the PTO may accept other materials related to the goods, such as shipping documents. A point of sale specimen must show use of the mark directly associated with the goods. Catalogs can be accepted if they include a picture of the product in close proximity of the mark and provide a means to order the product. Website screenshots can be used for goods if the mark is used prominently. The screenshots display the product in close proximity to the mark, and there is a way to purchase the product, such as a shopping bag or a cart button. Product information or ordering information can be used to enhance specimens of use. Marks appearing in the URL are generally not acceptable specimens of use. Acceptable software specimens are often confusing. Downloadable software is considered in the goods class 9. Acceptable specimens would consist of screenshots of the software, screenshots or digital photographs of the app on your phone in an app store listing the software. For downloadable computer software, an applicant may submit a specimen that shows use of the mark on an internet website. Such a specimen is acceptable only if it creates an association between the mark and the software. It provides sufficient information to enable the user to download the software from the website. Software accessed through the internet falls in the service class 42. Acceptable specimens would be screenshots of the page that allow you to register as a user and show the mark in close proximity.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that one thing to remember, as Elizabeth has gone into a lot of detail about specimens, is that the USPTO is very, very particular about what they'll expect. So in terms of the things that Elizabeth mentioned, I would just emphasize that your mark has to appear exactly as applied for or registered. There can't be any changes. I've seen specimens refused because an examining attorney thought there was an extra space between two letters, which was not evident to me. So you definitely want to make sure that your mark is depicted exactly as applied for or registered. and that you understand the distinction between a goods and services specimen. Typically, a specimen for goods must show the mark on the product itself, whereas for a service, you would show the mark in advertising. So those would just be some last minute tips I would consider, but there's a host of things for consideration. So I hope that all of our listeners listen to Elizabeth's very, very helpful advice as they consider specimens going forward. And that will wrap up our discussion on specimens via collaborative trademark practice. I'd like to thank Elizabeth for joining me on Trending Now and IP Podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please contact us. You can also visit our intellectual property practice page at williamsmullen.com/IP. There you can find out more about our team as well as past episodes of this podcast and legal alerts. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when our next episode posts. Thank you for listening, and until next time.